Shalom, we turn now to Psalm 81. For the leader on the Gittit of Asaph. Sing joyously to God, our strength. Raise a shout for the God of Jacob. Take up the song, sound the timbrel, the melodious lyre and harp. Blow the horn on the new moon, on the full moon of our feast day. For it is a law for Israel, a ruling of the God of Jacob. He imposed it as a decree upon Joseph when he went forth from the land of Egypt. I heard a language that I knew not. I relieved his shoulder of the burden. His hands were freed from the basket. In distress you called, and I rescued you. I answered you from the secret place of thunder. I tested you at the waters of Meribah, Selah. Hear, my people, and I will admonish you. Israel, if you would but listen to me, you shall have no foreign God. You shall not bow to an alien God. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. But my people would not listen to me. Israel would not obey me. So I let them go after their willful heart, that they might follow their own devices. If only my people would listen to me, if Israel would follow my paths. Then would I subdue their enemies at once, strike their foes again and again. Those who hate the Lord shall cower before him. Their doom shall be eternal. He fed them the finest wheat. I sated you with honey from the rock. We can understand and sense very strongly in this psalm the psalmist's projection of God's very deep longing and yearning for God's people. He says, or he puts the words in God's mouth, Israel, if you would only listen to me, you should have no foreign God, no other God besides me. But my people wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't obey me. And then in verse 14, if only my people would listen to me. Once again, if but only my people would listen to me, but they don't. But they don't. If they would only follow my paths, but they don't. Were they to follow God's paths, God says, he would vanquish all of Israel's enemies. Israel would basically have a free ride at that point. All Israel would need to do is follow God's laws, but they don't. And so the psalmist understands God as having a very strong need here. Abraham Joshua Heschel, in one of his greatest classic theology books, wrote about God's search for man. And that indeed is what Heschel called that book, God in Search of Man. Part of the premise of that book is not only that man ought to have a thirst and a yearning for God, but we need to understand that God is searching for us, that God always beckons to us, waiting for us to approach, to come closer. That if only our need for God were parallel to God's need for us, then the relationship between God and humankind would be vastly different. And human beings would then be able to aspire to a much higher level of holiness. But alas, that is not the case. Meanwhile, though, at the beginning of the psalm, the psalmist uses the imagery of musical instruments, and he talks about singing joyously to God, raising a shout for the God of Jacob, singing, sounding the timbrel, the melodious lyre and harp. So music and musical instruments are utilized for the purpose of singing songs of praise to God. Indeed, that is what occurred during the times of the Jerusalem temples, when the Levites would play on their musical instruments and sing psalms and songs of praise to God. And then we have the verse 4, blow the horn on the new moon, tik'u b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chagenu, ki chok liYisrael hu mishpat lelohei Yaakov. Blow the horn on the new moon, on the full moon of our feast day, for it is the law of Israel, for Israel, a ruling of the God of Jacob. This verse is included in the additional service, the Musaf service, in a section called Shofarot during Rosh Hashanah. Naturally, the connection is obvious with the reference to the shofar, blowing the horn, sounding the shofar on the new moon. The shofar on Rosh Hashanah is used as a symbol to awaken teshuvah, return, and a commitment towards repentance and change among all those who listen. So we go beyond the idea of using musical instruments for purposes of exalting and singing joyous praises to God. Now we have a kind of a spiritual, psychological, and religious shift here when we reflect on the idea of the shofar as a symbol of change, as a symbol of turning our hearts towards our Creator. This coming Rosh Hashanah, everything is going to be different because of the pandemic. And many synagogues are still grappling with the best way to handle the high holy days and to celebrate and observe those days, those sacred days, with their congregations. How do we do that when we have to be so very careful to observe safe health practices? How do we do it when we have to avoid congregating in large masses and numbers together in indoor, closed-in spaces? How do we sound the shofar the way we do in normal years, which is one of the most stirring and exciting moments of the entire High Holy Day services, when everyone stands erect and at attention while the shofar blower stands in front of the congregation and sounds the piercing, shrill blasts of the shofar, and everyone stands at attention. We get goosebumps, and we are deeply, deeply moved. But we're not going to be able to do that this year on that level. Many congregations, are talking about having drive-by shofar experiences where someone who is able to sound the shofar drives to different locations throughout the community and sounds the shofar in public places near people's homes or at skilled nursing or assisted living facilities, so that as many people can hear the shofar as possible. But the idea of doing it in the synagogue this year is highly unlikely, certainly not the way that we are used to it. And yet, whether it's sounding the shofar in neighborhoods or outside in synagogue parking lots so that people can hear it outdoors, however we do it this year, however different it's going to be, it's still going to be deeply meaningful to us. Sometimes change and sometimes moving outside the norm can challenge us, can stir us to even deeper and higher levels of faith and spirituality. I don't know what Rosh Hashanah holds in store for us yet in the next couple of months when we observe it, but what I do know is that we will do our utmost to use this as an opportunity to grow spiritually, to make positive changes in our life, and express our enduring and undying gratitude and appreciation to our Creator. Thank you.